Hi, guys. So our first guest in this series will be Dr. Tiffany Lashmet. So to start this off, will you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Tiffany Lashmet. I'm an extension agricultural law specialist with Texas A&M. I'm based at our Amarillo Research and Extension Center, and I've got responsibilities that are statewide. And so what that means basically is I do agricultural law education for Texas rural landowners and agriculture producers across the state. And so that ranges, from topics like fence law to water law to estate planning to landowner liability. I just do educational outreach in those areas to help support ag producers and landowners in Texas.
Awesome. Okay, so I love your podcast and I love your blog. And in one of those podcasts, you talked about how oftentimes farmers, ranchers, and just the rural community in general are unaware of the legal services that they're in need of. Could you just kind of talk about those and what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that probably we're all guilty of this, right? But you don't really think about what legal issues could come up until they come up, right? And then you have a problem. And so I think, when you're owning property, especially, there are just a lot of potential legal pitfalls that folks need to be aware of. So those can be something as simple as it's really important to have property insurance. I'm sorry, important to have liability insurance in case somebody gets injured on your property. And that's something you may not really think about unless you have somebody that's injured, and by then it's too late to get the insurance. And so that's an example. Nobody knows about fence law until there's a fence law dispute, right? And then they are getting on the internet to look up my blog or find my podcast to figure out like what's the law on this. And so I think that there's just a lot of areas that you might not think of again until they happen to you. And so I think that's one reason it's so important to have educational outreach type programs like Extension's able to do to help landowners, because at least with the law, so many times if you can get ahead of a problem, it's a lot easier to try and find solutions than if you are trying to deal with something after there's already been some sort of situation arise.
Right. Okay, so this is kind of unrelated to that. But when I think about attorney-client privilege, I normally don't think about agricultural law. I normally think about criminal and civil and family law. So has that kind of played a role in how you run your practice at all?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that. So agricultural law is not like a separate area of law, and that's what makes it a little bit strange and kind of interesting. So most agricultural law is going to be civil law. And so, it makes it fun because, right, agricultural law can hit on a bunch of different areas. So contract law or personal injury law or, property law, even family law, right? Like farmers and ranchers get divorced or farmers and ranchers need prenups. And so agricultural law really would fall within that civil law realm. And absolutely, I mean, if you are an attorney who is representing a client, or even an attorney who a client is talking to, like just soliciting legal advice, whether or not you've actually, agreed to represent them, that attorney-client privilege comes into play. And, that's a really important thing, I think, for, lawyers to really value and make sure that they are strict about, because listen, for clients to be able to come to an attorney and get the best advice possible, they have to know that what they tell us is confidential, right? And you'd be surprised, even, you think about it like in murder cases or something like that, right? But you'd be surprised, even in civil cases, there are things that come up that people may not be comfortable with everyone knowing. And so I think that, holding that attorney-client privilege, really respecting that, and sticking to the rules of that, it's really important, not only for your relationship with your own clients, but sort of for the legal practice as a whole, because it's just such an important piece of the legal system.
Right, and it's kind of an ethical thing. Like it's an ethical concern.
No, it absolutely is. Yeah. And there's ethical rules on it for attorneys. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, that's a question I've wondered about as well. Okay, so I know I found out about you through the Texas Ag Law blog and the Ag Law in the Field podcast. So, what this whole kind of webinar series is about will be developing a personal brand that will lead to success in ag law. And like you said earlier, I'm sure people are Googling things and your name pops up. So, has this just helped out with your personal branding? Do people know you because of this?
Yeah, it has. And it sort of started I mean, not accidentally, but I sort of had no idea where this would end up. So I started here about 7.5 years ago in my position, and kind of told my boss, right, like, I think I'm going to start a blog. And I think that everybody was like, oh, this girl's crazy. Like, that's not what we do in extension, you know? And I started that blog, and, you know, we're, like I say, we're about 7.5 years into the blog. We're about 3.5 years into the podcast. And man, it's exploded, right? Like, the page views that I get, the number of downloads, you know, a social media following, like, I'll go places and people will recognize me, which is really kind of funny. But I think that it's been really helpful to have that kind of information out there. And, you know, I think that the blog and the podcast, kind of the content, right? I think that if you can marry that with social media, that's where things can get good, right? And so I sort of say all the time when I talk about social media or internet in general, you want people to feel like they know you, right? Or know a piece of you from your social media. So, you know, if you follow me on like Facebook or Twitter, right, there's always like pictures of my kids feeding the cows, or there's, you know, I'm talking about what's going on our farmer ranch. And that I do that because, right, you need to build a relationship with this person so they feel like you know what you're doing, they can trust you, they feel like they know you. And I think that that's been really big in helping to kind of build the brand and promote the content that I'm creating.
Right. Yeah. And I've noticed that as well about your blog. But I found some interesting stats while I was doing research for this project. And according to brandyourself.com, 56% of attorneys use social media for client development, and 74% of consumers visit a law firm's website to take action. And that's just huge to me, because this is like a brand new kind of thing that law has never seen before. And the fact that people are kind of Googling legal services, and if your name pops up, you have a better chance of getting that business.
Yeah, no, it is crazy, right? And you think about, I mean, when you Google something, right, how many times do you go past the first page of results?
Never.
Never, right? You found
Yeah.
what you needed. And so I think it really does make where, you know, using that search engine optimization, figuring out how you can get your stuff popping up, you know, whether it's your firm website or, you know, for me, what happens a lot is, you know, people will put in, you know, Texas fence law. Well, if it's an article I wrote, then they end up at my blog where they can get all the info. And I think that that's been really helpful.
Right. Okay, so I'm kind of jumping back to the ethics thing. So ethical lawyers are not always the first thing you think of. So how have you built up that brand of just being a moral, ethical lawyer who's really just bent on making everything right?
Yeah, it's funny. So I think that it's bad lawyer jokes that make people feel that way about lawyers, right? So I guess I would say, you know, just like with any other profession, I think that there are a lot of really good lawyers, and there are a lot of lawyers who are really working to do well. There are a few bad apples, right? And unfortunately, that's who we see on the news, and like the ambulance chaser type people that we think of when we think of lawyers. So I think that part of what's really important is really enjoying the work you do, and really kind of having a passion for that work and for the people that you represent, right? And so for me, it's easy because I just love agriculture. I mean, you know, I grew up on my family's farm and ranch. We've been there for generations. I did 4-H and FFA. I was an ag major at Oklahoma State. That's sort of like in my blood, right? And so to have a job where I get to work to help my people, right? Ag people who are like my dad or my grandma or my neighbors, it's pretty easy for me to be fired up and to really want to do right by them, because I have so much respect and admiration for the people. And so I sure think that's part of it, at least for me, you know, is respecting that. I think a lot of people too would tell you that they really have a heart for like justice, and they just want to see things done right, you know? So I've heard people talk to, you know, people who work like at the public defender's office, for example, or criminal defense lawyers, and say, oh, I don't know how you could ever represent that terrible person. And I think what they would tell you is they believe in keeping the justice system like fair for everyone, right? And so that person, no matter how terrible they may be or the awful thing they're accused of doing, like, they deserve the justice system to work right for them, and they deserve for things to be fair, right? We want things to be done right. And so I just think that probably people would fall into those camps, right? A real respect for the people, and or a real respect for justice and wanting to preserve people's constitutional rights.
Right. And just kind of going back to loving what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, if you love what you do, I think you're automatically going to be better at it and you're going to want to do a better job. So
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that answered my question perfectly. Okay, so for those relationships in your community, first of all, did you move back to your hometown when you started your law practice?
I did not know. So I actually live, I'm in a small town that would be kind of similar to my hometown, but I'm not in my hometown. So I grew up in a little town in New Mexico. I'm about 2 hours away now, just in the Texas Panhandle.
Gotcha. Okay, so since you aren't like practicing in your hometown, how have you just built up those relationships? Are you part of any organizations? Like, how did you increase your networking?
Yeah, absolutely. As far as ag law goes, there are two groups that I always recommend, and I'll give you those specific ones, but kind of overarching, I would say no matter what area you're interested in, networking is super important. And so I really encourage people, find people who do what you do and connect with them. Whether that's, you just reach out to somebody randomly by email or you join organizations for that area. For lawyers, especially, we do a lot of, they're called CLEs, continuing legal education, and there are different conferences every year. Buckle into those because that's where you're going to meet people who do what you do. Specifically for agricultural law, there are two kind of groups that I'm a part of. The first one's the American Agricultural Law Association. That's our national organization of ag lawyers from around the country. I was fortunate I got plugged into that immediately upon my graduation from law school. I've been a member now for about 12 years. It's fantastic. I mean, in addition to having a great network of ag lawyers around the country to bounce things off of, or refer clients to, I've made some of my best friends in that group, and so that's been a huge blessing for me. That's also how I found my current position, was through that organization. In the state of Texas, we've got a state bar continuing legal education conference every year for ag lawyers. And that's been a great group as well. Fantastic content as far as education goes. I've learned so much there about, different areas of ag law and different updates or when laws get changed, et cetera. It's also been a great networking opportunity. There's not a ton of us that do ag law. And so everybody kind of goes to that conference. You really get to know everybody, and that's been great. But I guess the last thing I'll say, as far as at least ag law goes, people are really friendly, and I think people really have a desire to sort of help, new folks that are getting into the practice or law students who are interested in the topic. I think that we've done a really good job as a group of welcoming folks in, trying to be helpful. Kind of, for me at least, I remember the people who helped me when I had no clue what I was doing or how to get involved. And so I think as a whole, we're a really friendly group, and I hope that that's true in the experience that people have.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple law school questions. So, did you feel like your law school prepared you for the agricultural law issues that you deal with on a daily basis?
Yes and no. So the yes part of that answer is I think that my law school did a really good job of teaching me how to think like a lawyer.
Hmm.
While and the reason I'm going to say no on the ag law part is my law school did not have an ag law program. So I never took an ag law class. But what that law school did was do a really good job, I think, of teaching me how to research, how to write, how to really kind of construct legal arguments and to know what to look for. And so while maybe in law school I wasn't reading ag law cases, I was kind of learning the background and the way of thinking I would need to be able to analyze any case, whether it's an ag law issue or not. And so in that area, I thought my law school was really good. I also thought my law school was particularly good. I went to the University of New Mexico, particularly good at giving us practical experience while we were in law school. And so we had an evidence and trial practice course at school where you would actually take kind of the whole semester and prep to have a trial. And at the end of the semester, you literally had a trial. So you'd bring in people to be your witnesses. The judges from the state would come and serve as the judge. They'd have volunteers be the jury. I mean, it was really practical. We had another class where the professor was a federal judge in Albuquerque, and we would go to his courtroom every week and we would argue motions in front of him. I mean, so it really gave me good practical experience. It really taught me, I think, to be a lawyer. There was not an ag law program specifically. So that's why I would say yes and no.
Right. That's awesome. And in Oklahoma, there are no ag law programs. So all the schools I'm looking at, that's the issue I'm dealing with. Like, will I be prepared when I come back out here to practice? So that's actually super amazing to hear.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess I would say on that, just two quick things. When you're trying to pick a law school, right, there's a number of different things to look at. One of them is if you are set on you're coming back to a certain place and that's where I want to be, I would at least consider going to a law school in that area, just because, right, or that state or area, because that's going to give you the contacts you need there, right? So, like I said, in my classes, we had judges that were coming in and teaching classes. Well, it's great to know them if that's where I wanted to be. So I think that there's some real benefits there, even if they don't have an ag law program. The flip side of that is you can make some really great ag law connections and have some, ag law type courses in a school that may be further away that has the ag focus. And so, there's a balancing act there. I always tell people I don't think that there's a right or wrong. And I think that if you're interested enough in ag law and you're willing to get involved in these organizations and really do some of the legwork yourself, you can be successful either way. So for what that's worth.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, so really, if you could give one piece of advice to any college student looking to go to law school, what would that be?
For college students, I would say you need to focus on the numbers. And so that's going to be your GPA and your LSAT score, right? Your LSAT is the test you take to get into law school. And so, you want to put in the effort that you need to try to get that LSAT score kind of where you want it. You need to have a strong GPA, regardless of what your major is. So pick a major that you're interested in, you can do well in. Because I think, there are other things that they look at, right? There's the personal statement, there's letters of recommendation, but it's hard to get super far away from those numbers. And so I would just recommend, do the best you can to have high scores on those two areas. And also I would look at the schools you're interested in and kind of see, where your scores are going to fall with their averages and the different statistics that they put out.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So if you could give one piece of advice to any law school grad looking to practice in their rural community, what would that be?
If they're interested in ag law, it really would be to network with those two groups that I told you about. I mean, I just can't tell you. I mean, the value that I've gotten from those groups is amazing. I've got lawyers and we're in group text messages and we're floating things back and forth and look at this. Do you have that form? I mean, that's been super helpful to me. As far as practicing in a rural area, if you're going to, do that, I think that sort of you need to figure out what you're willing to do and not do as far as cases. Because if you're in a small town, right, and everybody knows you, they're going to walk in the door because they know you're a lawyer and they're going to think you'll handle DWIs and divorces and fence law disputes and wills. And there are some law firms that do all of that, right? I think that I would want to be careful and kind of draw some lines about what it was I do and what I don't do and be real clear about that. I also think that you're going to have to be prepared to make sure people understand that they're going to have to pay you for your services. I had this talk with a young lawyer recently, and it's hard because you go to law school and everybody's like, oh, will you just look this up for me? Will you do this for me? And they're your friends and you're a nice person, but this is your job, right? Like I wouldn't go to my friend who works at the grocery store and be like, hey man, give me a free steak, right? Like it's business. And so that's the other piece I think is tough in a small town, especially for somebody who's really, from there and knows everybody. It's a business and you have to make money because this is your livelihood. And so that's the other thing I would say.
Okay, well, that was some awesome advice. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, so that is actually all the questions I had prepared, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for allowing me to do this.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it. And I love that you're listening to my podcast and following my blog. I think it's great. And if I can be help for you or anybody else who's interested in ag law or the legal field in general, I'm sure glad to do that.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Bye.
Bye.